Greetings, 5th and 6th graders. It's time for religion class. Please take out your religion workbook and your Bible. Today we are on lesson 97, Paul's Nephew to the Rescue. And we are going to read in the Bible first. It is 3 whole chapters of Acts, so you maybe want to today use Bible Gateway to read those 3 chapters. Acts 18, 19, and 20. Pause the video right now and listen to or read along. Acts 18, 19, and 20. Pause the video now while you read. All right, now that you read from the Bible, I have a short little thing to read to you. This is the background of today's Bible story. Paul was no stranger to prison. In fact, a good amount of his witnessing took place in prison, where he was able to take advantage of a captive audience to tell the good news of salvation through Jesus Christ. In today's narrative, today's story, in the midst of danger, God offered protection through the actions of someone quite unexpected, Paul's young nephew, who was probably in his preteen or early teenage years. Regardless of his age, his role in the story is significant because it is yet another example of how God is in control in the midst of trouble and chaos. Paul also saw himself as an unexpected instrument of God because he was still troubled by his earlier actions of ordering Christians to be put to death. Even though Paul firmly believed in the forgiveness of his sins and all sins won by Jesus on the cross, he often reminded himself and others of how sinful he had been. He did this to show that God even uses sinners like him to further and strengthen his kingdom, which is another example of God using the unexpected. All right, now we are going to be in our workbook right here, Paul's Nephew to the Rescue, and we have some chains. I wonder why we have some chains going around the edge of our workbook page. Follow along while I read to you. Good grief. The Apostle Paul went on a 3rd missionary journey to revisit the churches established on earlier trips. This trip, as usual, had high and low points, but all was done to spread the gospel of salvation through Jesus Christ. Finally, it was time to return to Jerusalem, where, grief, Paul encountered some of the same troubles he had survived in Europe and Asia. The Roman tribune and his soldiers arrived to stop the mob uprising. But the only thing they could do was get Paul back to their barracks and then figure out what to do. Acts 21 verse 35 says, when he came to the steps, he was actually carried by the soldiers because of the violence of the crowd. Then, good grief, the crowd quieted down as they heard Paul speak to them in Hebrew. He said he was a Jewish man, and they were, as they were. He talked about the days when he had persecuted Christians. He talked about when Jesus came to him and he came to faith and began to preach the gospel. Then the crowd turned on him, saying, he could not be allowed to live. Acts 22, verse 22. So then, good grief, the Roman tribune ordered that Paul be taken into the barracks and flogged. That means hit with a whip. He thought he could beat the truth out of Paul, but Paul spoke about this, about his dual citizenship, meaning that he's the citizen of 2 countries. He was Jewish, but he was also a Roman citizen, and it was illegal to beat a Roman citizen who had not been condemned. Read Acts 22, 25 to 29 to see the reaction of the Roman soldiers. So 22, verse 25. But when they had stretched him out for the whips, Paul said to the centurion who was standing by, is it lawful for you to flog a man who is a Roman citizen and uncondemned? When the centurion heard this, he went to the tribune and said to him, what are you about to do? For this man is a Roman citizen. So the tribune came and said to him, tell me, are you a Roman citizen? And he said, yes. The tribune answered, I bought this citizenship for a large sum, Paul said, but I am a citizen by birth. So those who were about to examine him withdrew from him immediately, and the tribune also was afraid, for he realized that Paul was a Roman citizen and that he had bound him. So if you were a Roman citizen, you had to be treated with a certain amount of respect, and Paul was not being treated this way by the Roman soldiers and the tribune, and so they got worried and they kind of backed off. All right, I'm right above the next good grief. They needed to dump this problem on someone else. So what did they do? How did they get rid of this problem? Good grief. Paul was sent back to the Jews, this time to the Sanhedrin Council. Paul wisely knew that the Pharisees believed in a resurrection, but the Sadducees did not. So as Paul defended himself, he mentioned that he was a Pharisee who looked to the hope of the resurrection. This started an argument among the members of the council themselves. They were so mad at one another that they seemed to ignore Paul. Some of them even said, "We find nothing wrong in this man," Acts 23, verse 9. There was such an uproar that the Roman tribune had no choice but to take Paul back to the barracks. In the meantime, and we'll learn a little bit more in our next lesson. Let's look down at the review box, though. Covenant connection. In all of this chaos, Paul could rely on the promises of Jesus Christ, who said in John 14, verse 27. All right, so there you get to just simply copy down the words from John 14, verse 27. Please adjust your writing to fit on the line so that you can get all of that Bible verse on the line. And that is it for today. So in summary, watch the teacher video, fill out the review covenant connection box, and submit a picture of it, of page 200, where that review covenant connection box is. Make sure it's visible so I can read what you wrote, and turn it in on the assignment in Google Classroom. That is all for today. And we will finish up with this story and finish reading tomorrow. All right, bye.